Grow, Sell, and Retire is the podcast for the lazy overachiever. BD Dalton, author of True Gravity and Grow, Sell, and Retire, is here to give you his 25 years of secrets, tips, and systems to take your business to the next level. This is your chance to find out what is working in sales, marketing, and running your business. If you stop learning, you stop burning. Now, here's your host, BD, with today's GSR podcast.
Hey everybody, BD Dalton here for the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast, bringing you another awesome interview. This time we've got Minter Dial back. And guess what? He's written a book called Heartificial Intelligence. Yeah, Heartificial Intelligence. You remember in 2001 A Space Odyssey with Hal? You remember how Hal interacted with the crew? Dave, do not go that way. No, it's not right, Dave. And then you had Whopper from War Games that was interacting and acting like numbers, and then it started actually wanting to beat Matthew Broderick and take him on when it global thermonuclear war. But looking at this, I had my friend on, Shane Snow, in one of the interviews, and he had to change his Alexa to the name to be computer because he was talking to Alexa like it was his friend. Alexa started to be his friend and act and react to him. So Minter's going to, from his new book, is going to bring us some ideas around empathy and making sure that computers, people, businesses are interacting with empathy. So I'm going to bring you this interview with Minter Dial, the famous man who brought us Future Proof and now brings us Heartificial Intelligence. Here he is, Minter Dial, on his interview with me on the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast, making you a lazy overachiever. Well, we're here at the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast, and I'm here with Minter Dial. And Minter, would you just tell us why we'd have you back on? I've heard this Heartificial Intelligence, and you're going to introduce us to a new superhero.
Well, hopefully, thanks for having me back on, BD, and hopefully repeat offenders will be excused. I'm back on because I enjoy very much your energy and what you're up about, BD, at Grow, Sell, and Retire. And in this case, my latest book, in somehow is a progression of my thought. It's also a very personal statement that came out of a personal need. And yet I also believe it's a business sound advice. And for the forward-thinking companies and executives, it is the way forward, how to embed in code empathy into your business and into artificial intelligence. As far as the superhero story is concerned, we've got Mr. E and Dr. E, and both of them are superheroes. And the small story about that, BD, just for the fun of it, is at my sports club, I was going in to change for a game, and I noticed that the attendant there was doing some drawings. I looked over, we started chatting, and he was doing superheroes. And so I asked Joel, I said, listen, hey, on a spur of the moment, I said, what would you think about doing a superhero that was all about empathy? So Joel looked up at me, he says, scratched his chin, thought about it. He said, that's a good challenge. And I said, Joel, I want a woman and a man superhero. And that is how that story came around.
And so what is the difference between sympathy and empathy? Because everybody talks about have some sympathy and then an empathy. So for people that think that they know the difference but don't, where do you see this idea and the divide between the two?
Well, were we to be doing this video, I might show you an example. It's really quite fun. But the real story is that sympathy is about feeling sorry for somebody. Empathy is about feeling the feelings of somebody. So that if you are feeling sad, I will feel your sadness. I will understand why you're feeling sad. If I'm being sympathetic, I'll say, oh, BD, poor you.
And so then what are the superheroes? What are the superheroes' superpowers?
Well, I tried to separate them out a little bit because on the one hand, there's the subplot for the Mr. E, which is that, and something I argue in the book, is that generally speaking, us men, BD, are less endowed in empathy. And there are a number of reasons for that, including our genetic makeup, our hormonal balance, and the way our brains are wired. So it's, let's say through no fault of our own, and yet we can still learn it. So the one was how to become a super empathic male person. The Dr. E is naturally a woman, and she has a superpower of understanding. And I think in our world where we have a sort of a meta problem of divisiveness and inability to have civil debate, that sense of understanding of all different types from all different horizons is a beautiful power that can also be extremely effective in business.
That's awesome. So if we go right to that kind of that point and we look at it, so businesses are becoming more tech-based, tech-driven, and tech, kind of backing everything. Everything's becoming easier and online and on phones and everything else. Has business lost its heart? Well,
I'm not sure if it ever had a heart. At some level, of course, most businesses start with the entrepreneur and he or she has enormous heart and engagement. But if you look at statistics or studies, some of them show that 87% of employees at companies are not engaged with their work. So focusing on the employee side of things, there seems to be quite a challenge with bringing heart and engagement into the story. With regard to the tech component of it, I see two rather poor trends. One of them is, great, this is technology. How can we slash costs and cut heads? And yes, surely you do need to be extremely cost conscious and even, reducing costs wherever you can for shareholder return. But the idea behind it often is not well understood within the company, grates with culture, and ultimately kills value for the customer. What the third and better example would be companies that are looking at digital to enhance their strategy and in putting it in places where they can increase the value towards the customer. But this is very rare. And I think that the ability to add that value is all the more strengthened once you have more empathy in your system, more heart.
So that kind of brings me kind of to my second question. It's and you kind of alluded to it, but it's really straight to the question of is as we make more efficiencies in our business, do people, and this is customers or employees, do they matter less or than actually just selling them something? Does in today's world and the way it's acting, do people matter less?
Well, do people matter less? I would sound rather animalistic if I said no. At the same time, if you're a business owner, you do need to be sensible about your costs and the structures. And you generally want to also be putting your people where they matter most. So there are great opportunities to get better efficiencies in the back office, thanks to technology. There are amazing ways for that. There are also great ways to render more effective and efficient the front with using digital and data. The challenge is, of course, we're in these changing times, and sometimes some people do need to be made redundant because the types of jobs they are doing can be better done and appropriately so by machines. Yet I think the bigger thing is about working people with machines as opposed to without or instead of. And I think that therefore the role of people with this sort of digital machine-infused life will actually enhance the exceptionalities of people, which include their creativeness, their imagination, their relationship building, their sense of intuition, and all these other things which machines will have difficulty doing and replacing.
So if we're doing this, we're getting all this tech in the background, we're getting CRMs, we're getting apps and things like that. How, when you were looking at it in your book, how do businesses start to build empathy back into their internal processes and their customer-facing processes?
So putting empathy into business, the first point is that it's not about trying to be 100% empathic all the time everywhere. Second of all, you have to be very self-aware as to your culture. So a company that says, oh yeah, reads the book and says, well, we need to be really empathic, but they are a bunch of sharks, that really have no interest other than making shareholders money, it will resonate poorly, rather tinily. So how does one embed or create empathy? Well, I would say, first of all, do a self-check on the C-suite. Does the C-suite operate with empathy themselves? Because if the top doesn't demonstrate the behavior and attitude that you are looking to drive down into the organization, I think it'll be quite the lost cause, or certainly be the very long journey towards trying to becoming more empathic.
Because is this the old do as I say, not as I do type of leadership? And now I need to get back to do as I do leadership?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like digital transformation, a lot of the times leaders will say, well, you go off and do it. Well, actually, they need to be being digital themselves. And no transformation really succeeds without the top demonstrating the behavior, in my opinion. Some people talk about doing bottom up, but I really think, bottom up can be part of it, but it needs to start top down.
Yeah, and that's where leadership is built, isn't it? There's the example. So if we're looking at companies that you feel have lost their way in empathy, and maybe an example or two, so that we can figure, and maybe one or two that have either are doing well at it or have increased theirs. So one or two examples of poor and one or two examples of good aspects of empathy.
Well, let's say if I start with, I would call in the banking industry, the one that comes out as an industry which seems to have really lost the plot with regard to empathy. And whether I have a bank account in France and one in England, and it's extraordinary how it feels every month they're adding on new costs, increasing charges here and there, willy-nilly, under the guise that, they need to make more money. And at no point have they invited me to understand where my better value is. Why am I paying more? Am I getting more?
Yes, and seems like the same service just for more money.
The example that comes to mind, if I had to name a black sheep amongst them, is HSBC. So at one point, I decided to open up a business account for HSBC. And almost simultaneously, just after I had basically sent in the application, I said, oh gosh, maybe I could try one of these digital banks. So I looked at the digital banks, and the one that appealed to me most was Starling. So I did basically within an hour, I also did a Starling business bank application. And one of them came back to me with a credit card within 6 weeks. The other one came back to me with a credit card within 48 hours. So one of them is operating with a extreme desire to satisfy customer and is empathic to my needs. The other one sends out a lot of paperwork, administration, huge processes, and isn't quite interested in my business. You be the judge.
Yeah, just interested in covering their own backside, and their lawyers are the ones that are pushing all that.
Exactly. And when I told them about this, by the way, they're like, oh yeah, I know. And what are you doing about it? Because I had an opportunity to chat with somebody who was high up in the ranks. Another example of maybe not doing so well in empathy, but it might be less expected, is Uber.
Yeah.
But where they're less empathic, or have been less empathic prior to the new CEO, is with their drivers. They really took no care for their drivers. They thought of them as peons. And let's say they're very customer centric as far as you and I are concerned. But what happened was that they let go of understanding the individuals who are driving the cars, who are actually the ones bringing your brand to life. And it was extraordinary how many times I would talk to an Uber driver and they treat us like shit, or they're always trying to cut our costs, and I don't make enough money, or they're not worried about my safety, or they don't think about my last drive home. They do now, many of these things. But if you take a look at Lyft, L-Y-F-T, which doesn't operate in the UK but operates in the States,
yep.
There are many more women drivers because they were taking care of the drivers. So there's another example. On the good side, I have some examples on the good side if you want.
Good, please.
So one of them is CVS. So the drugstore company in the United States. It's a large business that just got approved the purchase entire wolfing up of Aetna.
Yes.
And CVS, with some 7,000 or so stores, has been extraordinary in its changing of its position and its suppliers' roles over the last 3 or 4 years. One of the things they did was that they stopped selling cigarettes from their stores. This was $2 billion in sales for them. So this is not a small thing for a large, a huge company.
Yes.
And that was because, well, they wanted to become a healthcare company. So they wanted to have integrity of their thought. And I'm not going to say it's directly empathic, but it certainly shows a more holistic understanding of what they're trying to do. And they're prepared to eat it out at the bottom line. And what else they do is they ask their the customers to what extent that they feel satisfied and that the salespeople had empathy for them. So this is at least a company that has put it on the table, and I think they would be the first to say that they don't have everything perfect, but at least they're attempting to integrate empathy at the floor level. Google is also quite known for trying to be increasing its empathy with regard to its employees. And the last example, which is quite fresh, is L'Oreal. I talk about them in the book. What they've done is they've implemented a training session for all their beauty advisors, who are the individuals in department stores, spraying you in the face with not a lot of empathy. And what they've done is they've trained their beauty advisors on this concept of empathy and have seen tremendous results on the store floor as a result.
That's cool. So if we're now talking to SMEs and that level, how do they build in some kind of empathy into future proofing their business? Throwing in your book title of previous book.
This is let this be more conversational, because I think there are many more elements to this. But let's say how do you encode empathy into your team? Let's say you, BD, are tremendously empathic, but you want to have more empathy, you want to have more empathy in your team. Whether you're a small or big company, it's the same issue, because we're dealing with human beings.
Yes.
And the challenge is, of course, as I said at the very beginning, you have to know where you are and be self-aware and how much progress you want it to do, and also to think about how much you want to actually invest in this, because it does take some investment in at least human time in order for people to open their eyes. One of the elements of this, of course, is to start having an understanding of your customers' experiences. And so, whereas, and sometimes with absolute right to think, well, my experience is bad when I use a phone. And that's an appropriate thing to bring to the table, because at least you're aware of the user experience. But you also want to start thinking about the experience from the customer's perspective. And they may not be like BD or like Minter. They may have other issues. They may be more technophobe. They may be have different belief systems about what they think of Google or whatever. And you need to get into the understanding what their thoughts are and beliefs and worries and so on, in order to better create the right design for them. So getting your team to think in other people's shoes, this include doing experiences with other people that they're not used to seeing and hearing it from their side. Another smaller tip is just to read fiction books, which we don't all seem to have a lot of time for. But if you read fiction books, or you maybe watch great movies where there's a lot of character development, it can throw you into the minds of other people. Like for men, to really think about the woman in the book and what's she going through if you have women customers. So that's there are many little tips as to how to get empathy into people. And of course, as I say, you have to lead from the top. But the cool thing about empathy is that actually, according to where your strategic need is, there's a role for empathy. For example, you want to be better at innovation. You want to, create the better products. Well, of course, if you are more aware of the trends, more understanding of what your customers' needs and wants are, empathy can play a tool. When you're designing, in design thinking, there's an opportunity to include a lot more empathy into the way you create a new product, the shape of the bottle. You're in the shower. You're thinking, how are they going to feel this? How are they going to squeeze it? How, is it going to slip out of my hands? How, all these little, that's because I used to work in L'Oreal.
Yeah, you worked at L'Oreal, so that everything that's is engaging in how the client uses it, physically uses it. So
exactly.
And so so would an exercise be sitting your team down, walking them through either something that went wrong and maybe what the client was thinking at that point in time and how you could improve it and what we could have done to ease the scenario? Because sometimes it's not about the actual product not breaking down. Sometimes it's about all the rest of the stuff that's going on in their life. And
100%, like the services, or if the person's not the right person. There are, of course, many reasons why it doesn't work. Well, that can be a good example. Of course, you need to find ways to represent the customer's perspective in a way that makes sense, and maybe to invite the people around the table to think, why didn't it work? What went wrong? And invite people to understand the gap between what they thought was the right product and the right proposition and why it didn't work out. When I do a lot of work on customer journey modeling, and the whole exercise there is to get into the shoes of the customer. One of the examples I do is in one of my methods, I get people to look at a person who's running a company or doing something, and I get them just to think about that person. And I don't even tell them what business the group is in. And so all they do is they focus on this woman or man, where he or she is, what she's doing, thinking, and what are her constraints, what are her worries, and what does her time look like. And then finally I bring them to the company and say, all right, now you're this company, how are you going to engage with her? Because too often what we do is we put ourselves ahead of, if you will, and we worry about our own issues and priorities and constraints. And then we finally think about latch onto this customer. And then let's be customer centric. Well, the reality is if we put the customer really to begin with customer first, if you will, although I say that to be employee first, but if you're in that process thinking about the customer well upstream, the chances are you're going to be better off in designing and proposing and servicing later on.
That's awesome. So let's move on to some questions about what you're doing now. So what do you have in store for 2019?
Well, in that, Artificial Empathy came out approximately 10 days ago. I feel a lot of artificial empathy in my new future. I've got I'm speaking at South by Southwest, and I've got a number of other gigs coming up on that. I suppose I'll I haven't lost the plot with Future Proof, and you did mention future proofing just before, because that's still, let's say, a popular topic.
Yes.
Future fit, future proof. In terms of my new projects, I've actually got a new book in the works that I'm hoping to do for, let's say, the end of winter 2020, maybe for South by Southwest 2020, and that one's on branding. The funny story about that one, BD, is it's a book that's been in the works for 5 years, and every year something's come up to make it not happen. And this was supposed to be the year I was going to do it. And again, what happened is my editor that I had selected came down very sick, and I ended up having to pivot to artificial empathy. And meanwhile, I'm working on some interesting projects on digital transformation with some large companies, mostly on the mainland. And that about sums up my projects these days.
Cool. And then how's the movie going?
So The Last Ring Home, it's been now up online now for 2 years on YouTube and Google Play and iTunes. I'm still trying to get Netflix and Amazon to host it. Fingers are still crossed. I still have every Memorial Day and Veterans Day in the United States, November 11, Armistice Day over here. There's a spattering of showings on television, and then let's say that my, not pie in the sky hope, but let's say my simmering, continuing thought is that somebody like Mr. Hanks is going to come along and say, "Hey, Minter Dial, is that you? I'd like to do your film."
That'll be awesome. So we'll make sure we put hashtag Tom Hanks in in the
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have actually I'm plotting out with a friend to go to LA after South by, and there's a wee little thought there, but
That's
to be
awesome.
to be confirmed.
That's awesome. And so how can our listeners follow you? I'll put it in the show notes, but tell us how we can follow you.
That's very kind. I suppose I try to provide the most value on my blog, minterdial.com, and I publish at least 2 blog posts a week with a podcast that's weekly, my own podcast. And otherwise, I would suppose the lightest version, if you're on it, is Twitter at mdial. And my podcast is, of course, on most typical podcast locations. I would obviously recommend things like Stitcher and iTunes.
Yes. Stitcher, Spreaker, iTunes, all that type of stuff. No, it's good. Well,
that's stuff.
Make sure we get all those listed too. And then the very last one, as a superhero or a creator of superheroes, what's a quick fire top tip that if the listeners are just listening for the last minute of this, and we're going to get them to go all the way back and listen to the 30 minutes of it, what's a quick fire top tip from Minter Dial about empathy and artificial empathy?
Wow. Well, I wanted to mention a book, Lost Connections by Johan Hari.
Okay.
It's a great book, and it's about disconnecting and reconnecting with yourself. Have self-empathy, have empathy for others who are maybe sad. As you know, the figures about the lifespan in the United States coming down, and suicide is amongst the reasons. So connect with others and make that effort.
Yes.
Have empathy for others. I also wanted to mention a podcast that's particularly interesting. It's called Femsplainers, with 2 women hosts, Christine Summers and Danielle Crittenden, which is one of my recent favorite podcasts. And it really is sort of a no-holds-barred, great entertainment, but also in covering really interesting topics, and it explores our minds. And for those of you who are of the masculine variety, I think we can learn a ton from them. As far as my top tip is concerned, it's notifications. I think that it's absolutely strategic to get on top of your notifications. I was on the plane last night from Istanbul, and there we were. This man beside me had his notifications pinging off on a merry basis, showing to the world how important he was and how incredibly rude he was to everybody else. I think you need to go to your notifications. You need to turn off all the sounds. You need to limit banners. You should be very limited on who pops up on your lock screen. For example, go to Twitter and only allow, let's say, for example, 3 or 5 selected accounts to show up on your lock screen. There's absolutely no reason to pollute your life and get out of control any more than we are today. So make friends with notifications. And my last point, BD, just to slip it in, is go meditate. And the woman I'm going to recommend is Monique Rhodes at 10 Minute Mind.
10 Minute Mind. Cool. Because last one, your top tip was to go unsubscribe. Hit the unsubscribe button. That was your favorite bit of tech last time. So I love that.
There you go. Thanks for reminding me. Well, this it kind of fits in with, like
it's the same thing. I love it. Unplug a bit and spend time on the things that matter. I think that's awesome.
That's the thing.
That's awesome. So thank you so much, Minter, for your time today. And I like I said, we'll promote this and get it out there. But thank you so much for your time, and thanks for speaking to the Grow, Sell, and Retire people.
My great pleasure, Beatty. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit bartdaltonconsulting.com or email contact@bartdaltonconsulting.com. Buy the book True Gravity on Amazon. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.